Kevin, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
Good, Lanier. How are you?
I'm doing well, doing well. Hey man, you spent over 20 years implementing ERP systems. What convinced you that people, not the technology, were the real factor of success?
Well, that's a loaded question, but so right, it's actually closer to 30 years now. Um, but so here's the pattern I kept seeing over and over again, right? I'd walk into mid-market company, whether it's distribution, manufacturing, field services, professional services, and I'd get handed a beautifully scoped ERP document. We'll we don't need to get specific on which brand it is, right?
Right,
Because the technology wasn't the problem.
right,
Um, Clean requirements, executive sponsorship, real budget, and then 6 months in, project would be limping along. 12 months in, project was in trouble. And every single time when you peel back the layers, the technology was working exactly as it was designed. But
hmm,
what wasn't was the humans around it, right? The controller didn't trust the new process. The warehouse supervisor felt threatened. And the owner would keep overriding the workflow because he didn't believe his own team. So I started keeping like a mental tally years ago, um, somewhere around 10 years ago. Um, and I realized I wasn't in the ERP business. I was in the human business, and ERP was, the artifact.
right.
Um, and the system was exposing what was already broken, or already healthy in the culture. So um, that was the conviction. It basically is that technology amplifies whatever is already there. If your people are clear and engaged and trusted, the system will soar. If they're not, you've just bought a very expensive mirror.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So let's talk a little bit about you and your firm. What inspired you to become the certified dream manager and launch Trinity One Consulting.
So Trinity One Consulting, I started it in 2020, which, in case
Right.
another world pandemic ever comes along, I wouldn't recommend doing that. It's not great for business.
Right.
So, um, so it launched in 2020, right? I've always wanted to work for myself, but it was just not feasible at that time. So I actually did have to go back and work for somebody else again. Um, but as far as the dream manager stuff goes, right, two things converged. And that was the conviction that I just described, that I knew the people side was the lever,
Hmm.
but I didn't have the methodology for it. I instinctually I knew something was wrong. I had 20 years of pattern recognition, but I didn't have a system to address it. So in comes the second part, which was reading the book, The Dream Manager, which is written by a gentleman named Matthew Kelly. And I eventually went through the certification through his company, Floyd Consulting. And that's where it all, clicked. Here's a structured way to engage the whole person, right? Not
Right.
just the employee. So my job is really to help someone articulate what they actually want out of their life. help them take steps towards it, and watch what happens to their work.
Hmm.
Trinity One came out of that kind of synthesis, the thesis of what I call the human and machine equation. You know, AI and operating systems optimize the operation side of the business, and dream management optimizes the people side. Um, you can't do one without the other. You
Right.
need both, and that's the whole reason Trinity One exists.
Gotcha. Let's transition. You mentioned something earlier about, engagement. Let's talk about, engagement, crisis. Um, I believe when we were doing our touch points early on, you say that you believe that people don't leave companies, they leave unlived lives. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's the line that reframes the entire retention conversation, right? Most leaders treat turnover like a compensation problem or a culture problem or a managerial problem. And sometimes it is that. But underneath all of that, right, there's usually something deeper. What's actually happening is that a human being is waking up on a Tuesday morning and, you know, realizing that the life they're living isn't the life they wanted. And the job is the most visible, most changeable variable in that equation. So they're not leaving the manager, the company, the people. They
Right.
leave the version of themselves they've become while working for you. You know, the exit interview will say, better opportunity or growth or compensation, when, the way I translate that is I stopped becoming who I wanted to be, and I'm trying to start again someplace else.
Right. Right. So why do so many organizations struggle with the, disengagement and retention of their employees?
Um, well, I think because they've been sold a transactional model of work for 50 years, and it doesn't really match how human beings actually function, right? The deal between employer and employee was, you give us your hours, we give you a paycheck.
Mm,
Please leave your personal stuff at the door, right? And
mm,
that worked more or less in the industrial economy, where the job was largely physical and largely repeatable. Um, my opinion is it does not work now, and it's only going to get more dysfunctional as the younger generation comes up, right? Knowledge work, service
NC.
work,
Yeah.
relational
Yeah.
work, you know, all of it requires the person to actually be present, to show up, but not just their body, their judgment, their creativity, their care. And you can't extract that transactionally, right? You have to invite it. And most organizations are definitely still running the old playbook,
Mm,
right? They've added perks on top, but the underlying contract hasn't changed.
right.
So they're trying to get a 2026 result out of I'll just pick the year of my birth, 1975 operating model.
Mm,
and they're confused when it doesn't work.
right. Right. So from your experience, what's been like the true cost, to businesses, for disengaged employees over the past 5 years?
Well, that's the direct cost is, it's measurable and staggering. And most people, well, I don't know if most people know the headline numbers, but people like myself and probably like yourself do, right? Gallup pegs the global cost of disengagement annually into the trillions. And the last number that I've studied was $8.8 trillion a year.
Wow.
Um, yeah, that's hard cash, right? I but I but that's not considering the cost that doesn't show up on the P&L because that's the one that kills companies, right? Disengaged employees don't sabotage you or the company, right? They do something worse. They comply. Like they just are. So they do the minimum acceptable amount of work. They don't flag the problem that they saw on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. They don't push back on bad decisions in meetings. They don't bring you the customer insight that would have saved the account. The cost is the option value of everything they could have contributed and didn't, right? And here's the kicker. That's a compounding effect. A disengaged senior person who trains a disengaged junior person who trains the next one, you know, within 3 or 4 years, you have an entire culture that's optimized for safety instead of contribution. And at that point, you don't have a retention problem. You have an existential one, for lack of a better word.
Right, right. So let's talk a little about something you mentioned before, the dream manager methodology. Can you give me a little bit more, detail, what about the methodology and then, how does it work?
Yep. So, like I said, it's nothing I came up with, right? A gentleman named Matthew Kelly wrote a book on it about 20 years ago. And the premise is um, beautifully just simple. And that's that every human being has dreams, and most of them go unarticulated or unpursued. And an organization that helps its people pursue those dreams unlocks a kind of loyalty and energy that you can't buy, right, with a raise or a bonus or anything like that. So mechanically, it works like this. Company designates or develops a dream manager inside the organization, right? They can send somebody to the training to be certified, or they can hire somebody like myself who's a fractional type person that comes in, um, and that person meets one on one with the employees on a regular cadence and helps them do three things. First, articulate their dreams across, there's 12 categories. I won't rattle them off because they take too long, but I'll give you a couple. So, what are the big three or four? Financial, physical, spiritual, relational, and professional, right? So, there's another seven after that. Um, and then second, prioritize which one matters the most right now. Like what are you thinking about the most when you're sitting at your desk? What are you thinking about that's not work outside of work, right? Because we're all human. We all have stuff going on outside of work, right? Whether we're getting divorced, we have a sick parent, our child's acting up, maybe you're dealing with substance abuse, like whatever,
Right,
right? The magic is in the consistency. It's not a one-time workshop. It's an ongoing relationship where someone in the organization or brought into the organization is genuinely invested in the whole person's flourishing. And over time, the employee begins to associate their own becoming with this company. And that's the bond, right? It's kind of getting away from, not kind of getting away from, it is getting away from the old contract of, you know, I pay you X, you give me Y.
right.
Now, I'm not saying the company's going to go buy you a house, right? Because that's not going to happen. so,
Right.
so what I'm saying is, um, you help people put things together. An example would be like, let's just make something easy. Like under the like adventure category, it's I want to get into like I just got back from Ireland. It's been a lifelong dream of mine. So if people um don't know how much it costs, like okay, so like the first thing I would ask if you were to say, Kevin, my lifelong dream is to go to Ireland, I'd say, okay, how much is that going to cost you? And if you say, I don't know, I'm going to say, okay, well, assignment for the next meeting is to figure that out. And then while you're figuring that out, figure out how much disposable income you have every month,
Mhm.
if any, right? And then you just keep peeling back the layers to till you get to a point to put a plan in place to get the people where they want to be, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. Gotcha, gotcha. Now, I'm big on, plan actual variance and actions. So I'm thinking about the outcome. From your experience, what measurable outcomes have you seen when companies adopt this approach?
Oh, I mean, the first is discretionary effort, right? The thing I was talking about earlier. When someone feels that their employer is genuinely invested in their life, not just the output they provide at work, they bring a different version of themselves to work. Um, they problem solve voluntarily, they protect the customer, they mentor the new hire, none of that stuff that's in the job description. And all of it is what actually drives results. The
Right,
second, which is more tangible, is the retention math, right? Replacing a mid level employee costs somewhere between 50 and 200% of their annual salary when you factor in recruiting, ramp time, productivity, and the institutional knowledge that's walking out the door.
right,
Um, if a dream program costs you, let's say, 2 to 3% of payroll, and it reduces voluntary turnover by even 20%, right? The
mm,
ROI is not subtle, right? I work in the professional services industry. When you got to hire a recruiter or a headhunter to go find you another consultant, it's 20 to 30 grand a pop, right?
right,
So if 20% is, let's just make it easy. Let's say it's a 100-person company. If 20% is 20 people, 20 people times 30 grand
mm,
is not small money,
right,
right?
right,
It's so the cost of the dream manager when you measure it against just hard cash, you know, uh, it's a rounding error against the savings that they get.
right, right. That makes sense. Hey, let's discuss human performance. So if a company does adopt this methodology, how should leaders balance systems, processes, and human development in this new ecosystem?
Yeah. So that's the trick, right? That's the whole reason my podcast exists. Um, the first part is engagement, right? So like I work in ERP implementations.
Right,
What happens in most ERP implementations is, you walk in there, right? You're the consultancy, and you'll walk right past however big the company is, 50, 100, 200, 500 people, whatever, into a conference room and sit there with, a bunch of middle to senior level managers. Um, and start drawing out the business process. And I'm the guy that will always go, hey, can we take a factory tour? Like, can I go talk to the people out there?
Right, right,
Because I don't know when the last time you turned a screwdriver was, but I can guarantee you we're gonna get some useful information out there.
right.
Um, it's usually a shocking get, but whatever. So it's engagement scores climb, and that's usually the leading indicator. Then the voluntary turnover drops, usually meaningfully within 12 to 18 months. And then like the lagging indicators start to hit, right? Productivity per employee improves, customer satisfaction improves, internal referral hiring goes up because your people are, you know, actually telling their friends to come work there now.
Right.
And, to be candid, the companies that get the biggest results are the ones where the owner or CEO is personally bought into the initiative.
Mm.
If the executive team treats it as an HR initiative, it underperforms and fizzles out. If they treat it as a leadership philosophy, um, it'll transform the workplace, like for sure.
So let's talk a little bit about EOS. What is it, and what
Mm.
role does it play in translating vision into execution?
Yeah, so EOS is acronym for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. It it is becoming more and more like more and more companies that I go into are using it. Right. So there was a book written, I don't even know how many years ago, called Rocket Fuel, and two books actually, Rocket Fuel and Traction. So um, it's one of the cleanest frameworks I've seen in 30 years for getting a leadership team aligned on vision, accountability, and execution rhythm, right? I serve as an integrator, what they call it, an integrator for clients, which is essentially a COO. The person that drives results. Um, and the reason I love that role is because that role sits exactly at the seam where vision, the owner, meets reality, right?
Mm.
So visionaries, owners, constantly having ideas. The integrator translates them into actual work that gets the job done. And sometimes has to focus the visionary person, right? It's like, hey, like I got you, right? Like you're not going to last very long if you don't know how to deal with the visionary,
Right,
right? You're not going to stay around long by saying no, but you can get there by saying, hey, I hear you. Um, but you have these five other things that you've already laid out. Which one comes first?
right,
EOS does three things really well. It forces clarity on the vision in writing so that the team's rowing in the same direction. It creates accountability through a defined structure with clear roles, clear scorecards, and a clear weekly cadence. And then it builds an execution rhythm. They have terms that are called quarterly rocks, which are just like the most important things we're going to do. They call like level 10 meetings are the weekly meetings that you have,
right,
and then annual planning, right? So the company is constantly converting strategy um, into shipped work. Now, I'll tell you what it doesn't do on its own. It doesn't address the deep human flourishing question, right? It's an operational framework.
mm,
That's why I pair the dream manager work with the EOS side of it, right? Because, like I said, the dream manager handles the human side, and EOS handles either the machine side and or the operating. I mean, look at it as it, I mean, it's called the entrepreneur operating system. Look at it as the operating system for the business.
Right.
So together, when you complete those things, that actually wants to grow without grinding its people down.
Mhm. So let's talk about,
Yeah.
culture and leadership. Um, what leadership behaviors build trust and loyalty that you found from your experience?
Well, um, first I'd say consistency. Um, you're, the team needs to know that you're going to do or what you're going to do before you do it. Inconsistent leaders create anxious cultures, and anxious cultures don't perform.
Mhm.
Following right off of that is follow through, right? So if you say you're going to do something, do it. Small things, big things, doesn't matter. Every kept promise is a deposit in the bank for a leader, and every broken one is uh, a withdrawal. And then third, and this is the one most leaders skip, and that's have a genuine curiosity about your people. And that's not performative listening, actual interest in who they are when they're not at work.
Mhm.
If you do those three things over a long enough time horizon, you don't have to work on culture because the culture you're building the culture by doing that.
Right.
Um, I would even throw a fourth one in there, and that's be vulnerable yourself as a leader, right? Which a lot of people, especially men, find a difficult time doing, right? Like
Hmm.
bearing their soul to people, right? Like, we got to think we got to be all macho and stuff, and not the case really. So,
Right, 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 right. So let's talk about this. What advice, like I said, you work with the, C-suite and upper management. What advice do you give CEOs or senior leadership struggling with turnover, in their firm?
uh, what do I give for people? And it's it's a numerical answer, right? Lower turnover equals higher engagement and better recruiting and stronger customer outcomes.
Mm.
It's real, it's measurable, and the math works. Um, I've seen it. I don't even know how many times. But if the leader is only investing in the whole person because of the ROI, the team's going to sense the transaction underneath it and the whole thing will collapse. The
Right.
leaders who get the biggest ROI are the ones who would do it even if the ROI weren't there, right? Because they believe it's the right way to run a company. The
Hmm.
return follows the conviction, not the other way around. It was a
Hmm.
long answer to a short question, but
No, it makes sense. Makes sense. So, Kevin, where can people find more about you and the work that you do? And I'll put the links in the in the podcast notes below.
yeah, easily enough. My website is trinity1consulting.com. Email is just simply Kevin at trinity1consulting.com. And or you can check out my podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and it's called The Dream Dividend. And I babble a lot more about all this stuff that we're talking about.
Oh man, that's great. So, we end every episode with a question and we'll close on your answer. So, if you could leave leaders with one principle about building organizations where people thrive, what would that be?
that the business will only ever be as healthy as the humans inside it. You you can't out strategize or out execute or out systematize a broken human. So if you want to build something that lasts, build your people, help them become more of who they're meant to be. And the business results are a byproduct of what will come of it, not the point of it. Get the order right, and everything else takes care of itself, right? It's a lot of people say it, but you actually have to mean it. Like, we take care of our people first.
Right.
You'll hear two things: customers first or people first. Usually the people that are saying one of those two are full of what. Um, but if you put the people first genuinely, great things are going to follow.
Wow. Great insight. Great insight. So, Kevin, thank you so much. I appreciate you making time, to be on my podcast and provide your knowledge and your wisdom. I definitely look forward to connecting with you again in the future. If you have anything significant you want to share back with my podcast followers. So thank you again so much for
Hey
joining us
man,
today.
thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care now.
All right, take care.
I really love that. But real quick before we wrap, please support our sponsors. This episode was brought to you by Crunch Time Gourmet Popcorn and Apples out of Bridgeport, West Virginia. Shop their flavors online at crunchtimebbv.com. That's crunchtimewv.com.
And if you're in a serious growth season, LinkedIn Premium is designed to help you get hired, grow your business, or learn new skills.
Plus, this segment featured Fundrise's Innovation Fund VCX. If you want access to high-growth tech companies before they go public, learn more at fundrise.com/VCX.
And for additional information, please reach out via our website at www.karaswinnovations.com. Check out our other podcasts, The Continuous Improvement Lab, and our YouTube channel at Karas Innovations Group.
And a huge thank you to our executive producer and founder, Lanier Johnson.